Have you ever wished you could go back and change something you said? Have you ever wondered what the world will look like 100 years from now? Have you ever daydreamed about meeting your great-great-grandparents? Or perhaps witnessing the construction of the pyramids with your own eyes? If you have, you're not alone. In fact, you're part of a tradition that stretches back thousands of years, connecting every culture, every civilization, and every generation of human beings who have ever looked at a clock or watched the sunset and wondered, what if we could control time itself? Time travel is one of humanity's oldest and most persistent dreams. It appears in our ancient myths, our religious texts, our philosophy, our literature, our movies, and even in our most advanced scientific theories. From the Epic of Gilgamesh to Einstein's theories of relativity, from H.G. Wells's famous novel to the latest Hollywood blockbuster, the idea of moving through time has captivated us, challenged us, and inspired us. But what exactly is time travel? And why are we so fascinated by it? At its simplest, time travel means moving through time in a way that's different from the normal, steady forward march we all experience every day. Right now, you're traveling through time at the rate of 1 second per second, moving steadily from the past into the future. But time travel, as we usually imagine it, means breaking free from that steady march, jumping backward to visit the past, leaping forward to see the future, or perhaps even stopping time altogether. This script is going to take you on a comprehensive journey through the history of time travel, not as a traveler through time yourself, but as an explorer of how human beings have thought about, dreamed about, and tried to understand the possibility of time travel throughout history. We'll start at the very beginning, with the earliest humans who first began to think about time as something more than just the cycle of day and night. We'll explore ancient myths and legends from cultures around the world, where gods and heroes bent time to their will. We'll meet philosophers from ancient Greece to medieval Europe to modern America who wrestled with profound questions about what time actually is. We'll trace the evolution of time travel in stories and literature, watching as imaginative writers transformed vague dreams into detailed narratives. We'll see how movies and television brought time travel to life in ways that captivated millions. And we'll dive into the real science, explained in simple, everyday language, that suggests time travel might not be just fantasy after all. Along the way, we'll encounter mind-bending paradoxes, ethical dilemmas, and questions that still don't have clear answers. We'll ask, if you could travel in time, what would happen? What could go wrong? And should you even try? This is a story about human imagination, human curiosity, and the human desire to transcend the limits that nature seems to have placed upon us. It's about our relationship with time, that mysterious dimension that governs every aspect of our existence, yet remains one of the most puzzling phenomena in the universe. So let's begin our journey. Let's explore the history of time travel, from the first moment a human being looked up at the stars and wondered about eternity, all the way to today's cutting-edge physics laboratories where scientists are exploring whether the laws of nature might actually permit us to visit yesterday or tomorrow. Welcome to the history of time travel. The first clocks, nature's rhythms. Long before anyone imagined traveling through time, humans had to first understand what time actually was. And that understanding began in the simplest possible way, by watching the world around them. Imagine you're living 50,000 years ago. You don't have clocks. You don't have calendars. You don't even have written language to record what happened yesterday or plan for tomorrow. How would you know what time it is? How would you organize your life? The answer is you'd watch nature. The most obvious marker of time was the sun. Every day, without fail, the sun rose in the east, traveled across the sky, and set in the west. This created the most basic unit of time, the day. During the day, there was light and warmth. You could hunt, gather food, work, and socialize. When the sun set and darkness came, it was time to rest and sleep. But early humans noticed something else, too. The sun didn't just rise and set, it followed a pattern. In some seasons, the days were long and warm. In others, they were short and cold. Plants grew and died. Animals migrated. Rivers flooded and receded. All of this happened in a cycle that repeated over and over again. This cycle became the year, though early humans didn't call it that. They simply understood that there was a rhythm to nature, a great wheel that turned and returned to the same point again and again. The moon provided another way to track time. Unlike the sun, which looked the same every day, the moon changed its appearance in a predictable pattern. It would appear as a thin crescent, grow fuller night by night until it became a bright circle, then shrink back to a crescent and disappear, only to begin the cycle again. This cycle took about 29 or 30 days, what we now call a month. These natural rhythms, the day, the month, the year, were humanity's first clocks. They weren't just useful for knowing when to plant crops or when to expect cold weather. They also gave humans their first sense that time had a structure, a pattern, a kind of order to it. The concept of past, present, and future. As human societies grew more complex, people began to think about time in a new way. They started to distinguish between three different kinds of time: the past, the present, and the future. The past was everything that had already happened. It was the stories elders told around the fire about great hunts, terrible storms, or battles with neighboring tribes. The past was memory, sometimes accurate, sometimes embellished, but always important because it helped people understand where they came from. The present was now, this very moment. It was the immediate experience of being alive. Feeling hungry, being cold, seeing the sunrise, hearing a child laugh. The future was what hadn't happened yet. It was the next day's hunt, the coming winter, the crops that would need to be planted. The future was uncertain and unknown, but it could be anticipated and prepared for. This division between past, present, and future seems obvious to us now, but it was actually a profound intellectual achievement. It meant that humans weren't just living in the moment like other animals. They were thinking about time as something that extended in both directions, backward into what had been, and forward into what might be. And once humans could think about time this way, they could start asking deeper questions. What happened before I was born? What will happen after I die? Is there a beginning to time? Will there be an end? These questions would eventually lead to the idea of time travel. Because once you understand that time has different parts, past, present, future, you can start to wonder, is it possible to visit those other parts? Could you somehow go back to the past or forward to the future? But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before time travel could be imagined, humans needed to develop more sophisticated ways of thinking about time. Sacred time and eternal time. As human civilizations developed religions and spiritual beliefs, a new concept emerged: the idea that there might be different kinds of time. There was ordinary time, the day-to-day passage of moments that everyone experienced. This was the time in which you cooked your meals, tended your animals, and grew old. But there was also sacred time, special moments when the normal rules seemed to be suspended. These were times of religious rituals, festivals, or profound spiritual experiences. In sacred time, people felt connected to something beyond the ordinary world. The ancient past might feel present again. The eternal might touch the temporary. Many ancient cultures believed that during certain rituals or ceremonies, they could actually step outside of normal time and enter a different kind of time altogether. When a priest performed a sacred ritual, he wasn't just remembering something that happened long ago. He was, in a sense, making it happen again. The past became present. For example, in many religious traditions, annual festivals weren't just commemorations of ancient events. They were reenactments that somehow made those events real again. When ancient Israelites celebrated Passover, they weren't just remembering the exodus from Egypt. They were, in a spiritual sense, experiencing it themselves. The ritual collapsed the distance between past and present. This idea that time might not be as fixed and linear as it appears was one of the earliest hints toward time travel thinking. If sacred time could make the past present, if rituals could somehow transcend normal chronology, then maybe time itself was more flexible than it seemed. Some cultures went even further and developed the concept of eternal time or timelessness. This was the idea that beyond our ordinary experience of past, present, and future, there might be a realm where time doesn't exist at all, where everything simply is, forever and always, without change or progression. In this eternal realm, many believed the gods or God existed. Unlike humans, who were born, lived, and died, the divine was thought to be timeless, existing outside of time altogether. This raised fascinating questions. If God exists outside of time, can God see all of time at once? Does God see the past, present, and future simultaneously, like we might see different parts of a landscape from a high mountain? These ideas about sacred time and eternal time weren't time travel in the way we usually think about it. No one was imagining machines that could take you to different eras. But they were important steps in the evolution of time travel thinking because they suggested that our normal experience of time flowing steadily from past to future might not be the only way time could work. Cyclical time versus linear time. Different ancient cultures had fundamentally different ways of understanding time's overall structure. And these differences shaped how they thought about history, destiny, and the possibility of change. Many ancient cultures, particularly in Asia, saw time as cyclical. Like the seasons or the phases of the moon, time was thought to move in great circles. History didn't progress from a beginning to an end. Instead, it repeated itself over and over again in vast cycles. In Hindu philosophy, for example, time is understood through the concept of yugas, vast ages that cycle through creation, preservation, and destruction, only to begin again. The universe is created, exists for countless eons, is destroyed, and then is created anew. This process has been happening forever and will continue happening forever. There is no ultimate beginning or final end. Buddhism has a similar concept. The wheel of samsara represents the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth that all beings go through. Time is like a wheel that keeps turning, and enlightenment means stepping off the wheel entirely, escaping time itself. This cyclical view of time had profound implications. If time is a circle, then in some sense, everything that has happened will happen again. The same events, the same people or versions of them, the same joys and sorrows, all will recur endlessly. The future eventually becomes the past, which eventually becomes the future again. In contrast, many Western cultures, particularly those influenced by Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, developed a linear view of time. In this view, time has a clear direction. It begins at a specific moment, creation, progresses through various stages, history, and will eventually reach an ending point, the end times or final judgment. In linear time, events happen once and only once. History doesn't repeat itself in exactly the same way. Time is like an arrow shot from a bow. It starts at one point and flies toward a target. You can't go back to the beginning and shoot the same arrow again. This linear view of time made the idea of traveling backward in time seem particularly strange and paradoxical. If time is like an arrow, how could you travel back along the arrow's path? If events happen once and are then over forever, how could you revisit them? The cyclical view, on the other hand, made time travel seem somewhat less paradoxical. If time is a circle and events repeat, then perhaps moving through the circle in different ways might be possible. You might not travel back to the exact same moment, but you might return to a very similar one in the next cycle. These different understandings of time structure, cyclical versus linear, would continue to influence how different cultures imagine time travel for thousands of years. The invention of measurement, hours, minutes, seconds. As civilizations became more complex, people needed more precise ways to measure time. It wasn't enough to know roughly what season it was or whether it was day or night. People needed to coordinate activities, schedule meetings, plan projects, and organize daily life in increasingly sophisticated ways. The ancient Egyptians were among the first to divide the day into smaller parts. They invented sundials, which used the shadow of a stick or pillar to show the progression of time during daylight hours. They divided the day into 12 parts, which eventually became our 12 hours. They also divided the night into 12 parts using the stars as guides. But these early hours weren't the same as our hours. An Egyptian daytime hour was longer in summer, when days are longer, and shorter in winter, when days are shorter. It wasn't until much later that people developed the idea of hours that were always the same length, regardless of the season. The ancient Babylonians developed mathematics based on the number 60, which is why we have 60 minutes in an hour and 60 seconds in a minute. This system was remarkably effective because 60 can be divided evenly by many different numbers: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, 30, and 60, making calculations easier. As time measurement became more sophisticated, mechanical clocks were invented. Early mechanical clocks, developed in medieval Europe, used weights and gears to create regular, predictable motion that could mark the passage of hours. Later, pendulum clocks used the regular swing of a pendulum to measure time even more accurately. Each improvement in timekeeping technology changed how people thought about time. When you can only measure time in rough portions, morning, afternoon, evening, time seems fluid and flexible. But when you have a clock that divides the day into hours, minutes, and seconds, time begins to seem like something concrete and measurable, almost like a physical thing. This shift was important for the eventual development of time travel ideas. The more precisely we could measure time, the more we could think about it as a dimension, something that could potentially be navigated just like the 3 dimensions of space. Think about it this way. When you can only tell that it's sometime in the afternoon, time seems vague and unmeasurable. But when you can say it's 3:47 and 23 seconds, time begins to feel like a coordinate, like a specific point on a map. And if time is like a map, then maybe you could move around on that map, just as you can move from one place to another on a geographical map. Early questions about time's nature. As human beings developed the ability to think abstractly and philosophically, some began to ask fundamental questions about what time actually is. These weren't questions about how to measure time or how to organize daily life according to time. These were deeper questions about time's essential nature. Is time something real that exists independently of us? Or is it just a concept in our minds? If everything in the universe stopped moving completely, would time still pass? Can time exist without change? Does time flow at the same rate everywhere in the universe? These questions might seem abstract and impractical, but they were actually essential groundwork for the idea of time travel. Because if you're going to imagine traveling through time, you first need to understand what time is. One of the earliest thinkers to grapple seriously with these questions was the ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus, who lived around 500 BCE. Heraclitus is famous for saying that you cannot step into the same river twice. What he meant was that everything is constantly changing. The river you step into now is not the same river you'll step into a moment from now, because the water has flowed on and new water has taken its place. Even you are not the same person you were a moment ago, because your body and mind are constantly changing. Heraclitus saw time as inseparable from change. Time, for him, was the ongoing process of everything in the universe constantly transforming into something else. Without change, there would be no time. Another Greek philosopher, Parmenides, disagreed completely. Parmenides argued that change was actually an illusion. According to him, reality is eternal and unchanging. All the change we seem to see around us, seasons changing, people aging, rivers flowing, is just an illusion of our senses. True reality is timeless and permanent. If Parmenides was right, then the flow of time might also be an illusion. Maybe past, present, and future all exist simultaneously in some eternal now, and our experience of time flowing is just a trick of our limited human perception. These competing views, time as constant change versus time as illusion, would echo through philosophy for thousands of years and would eventually influence how people imagine time travel. If time is real and constantly flowing, then time travel means somehow reversing or accelerating that flow. But if time is an illusion and all moments exist simultaneously, then time travel might mean finding a way to access moments that are already there, just hidden from our usual perception. Time in ancient calendars, organizing the years. While philosophers debated the nature of time, practical people needed calendars to organize agricultural cycles, religious festivals, and civic life. Creating an accurate calendar turned out to be remarkably difficult. The problem is that the natural cycles that mark time don't fit together neatly. A day is the time it takes for the Earth to rotate once on its axis. A month is roughly the time it takes for the moon to go through its phases. A year is the time it takes for the Earth to orbit the sun. But these 3 cycles don't align perfectly. A year isn't exactly 12 months long. It's about 12.37 lunar months. And a year isn't an exact number of days. It's about 365.25 days. Different cultures solve this problem in different ways, creating a variety of calendar systems. The ancient Egyptians created a calendar with 12 months of 30 days each, plus 5 extra days at the end of the year, giving them 365 days. This was simple and practical, but it slowly drifted out of alignment with the seasons because they didn't account for that extra quarter day. The ancient Romans initially used a calendar that was constantly being adjusted by priests, which led to all sorts of confusion and political manipulation. Eventually, Julius Caesar reformed the Roman calendar, creating what we call the Julian calendar. This calendar had 365 days most years, with an extra day added every fourth year, leap year, to account for that extra quarter day. This system was much more accurate. Later, Pope Gregory XIII refined this even further, creating the Gregorian calendar that most of the world uses today. The Gregorian calendar has a more complex leap year rule that keeps the calendar aligned with the seasons to within 1 day per 3,000 years. These calendars were essential tools for organizing society, but they also shaped how people thought about time. A calendar divides time into discrete units: days, weeks, months, years. It gives time a structure almost like a filing system for organizing events. This organization of time made it possible to think about traveling to specific points in time. You couldn't just say, "I want to go back in time." You could say, "I want to go back to March 15th, 44 BCE, the day Julius Caesar was assassinated." The calendar created coordinates in time, just as maps created coordinates in space. The ability to pinpoint specific moments in history was a conceptual prerequisite for imagining time travel. Before you can imagine visiting the past, you need to be able to specify which past you want to visit. Introduction to mythological time. Now that we've explored how early humans understood and measured time, we can look at how they imagined transcending it. Long before science fiction, long before anyone had written novels or made movies, ancient peoples told stories, myths and legends that were passed down through generations. And in many of these myths, time worked differently than it did in ordinary life. Gods and goddesses could see the future. Heroes visited realms where time stood still or where centuries passed in what felt like moments. Prophets received visions of things that hadn't happened yet. Mortals were cursed to live forever, experiencing endless time, or blessed to visit the afterlife, a realm beyond time altogether. These weren't stories about time travel in the modern sense. No one was building machines or discovering scientific formulas. But they were stories about transcending time's normal limits, which is, in essence, what time travel is all about. What's fascinating is that cultures all around the world, with no contact with each other, independently developed myths that involved unusual relationships with time. This suggests that thinking about time differently than we normally experience it is something deeply rooted in human imagination. Let's explore some of these ancient myths and see how different cultures imagined the possibility of breaking free from time's usual constraints. Celtic myths, the land of the ever-young. In Irish mythology, there's a beautiful and haunting story about a realm where time works very differently than it does in our world. The story tells of Oisin, a great warrior and poet, who was the son of the legendary hero Finn Mac Cumhaill. One day, while hunting with his father and the other warriors of the Fianna, Oisin encountered a beautiful woman riding a white horse. Her name was Niamh, and she was a princess from Tir na Nog, the land of the ever-young. Niamh invited Oisin to return with her to her homeland, describing it as a paradise where there was no sickness, no aging, no death, and no sorrow. Time itself, she explained, worked differently there. Captivated by both Niamh and her description of this magical land, Oisin agreed to go with her. They rowed together across the sea to Tir na Nog, and when Oisin arrived, he found everything Niamh had promised. The land was beautiful beyond description. He married Niamh and lived in perfect happiness. He never felt tired, never felt sick, and never seemed to age a single day. What felt like 3 years passed in this timeless paradise. But eventually, Oisin began to miss his homeland. He longed to see his father and his old companions once more. Niamh understood but warned him that he must not set foot on Irish soil. She gave him her white horse and told him he could visit Ireland, but he must stay mounted on the horse at all times. If his feet touched the ground, the spell would be broken. Oisin agreed and rowed back across the sea to Ireland. But when he arrived, everything had changed. The great fortress where he had lived was nothing but overgrown ruins. The people he met were strangers who spoke of the Fianna as ancient legends from hundreds of years ago. What had felt like 3 years in Tir na Nog had actually been 300 years in Ireland. Oisin was devastated. Everyone he had known was long dead. The world had moved on without him. While looking at the ruins of his old home, he saw some men struggling to move a large stone. Forgetting Niamh's warning, he leaned down from his horse to help them. The saddle strap broke, and Oisin fell to the ground. The moment his feet touched the Irish soil, all 300 years caught up with him at once. In an instant, he transformed from a young man into an ancient, withered elder. Some versions of the story say he lived just long enough to tell his tale to St. Patrick before dying of extreme old age. This story is a perfect example of how ancient myths explored the idea of time working differently in different places. Tir na Nog wasn't in the future or the past. It was in a different kind of time altogether, a place where the normal rules didn't apply. The story also introduces a concept that will appear again and again in time travel fiction. The idea that time can pass at different rates in different places. While Oisin experienced 3 years, 3 centuries passed in the regular world. This is actually remarkably similar to what modern physics tells us about time dilation, which we'll explore much later in this script. Japanese legends, Urashima Taro. On the other side of the world, in ancient Japan, there's a strikingly similar story that predates the Irish tale by centuries. Urashima Taro was a young fisherman who lived in a small village. One day, while walking along the beach, he saw some children tormenting a turtle. Being kind-hearted, Urashima intervened and rescued the turtle, releasing it back into the ocean. A few days later, while he was fishing, the same turtle appeared beside his boat. To Urashima's amazement, the turtle spoke, thanking him for his kindness. The turtle explained that she was actually a servant of Ryujin, the dragon god who ruled the ocean. As a reward for his kindness, the turtle invited Urashima to visit Ryugujo, the dragon palace beneath the sea. Urashima climbed onto the turtle's back, and they dove beneath the waves. They swam deeper and deeper until they reached a magnificent palace made of coral and precious stones. There, Urashima was greeted by Princess Otoheim, the daughter of Ryujin. She thanked him personally for saving her servant and invited him to stay as her honored guest. The underwater palace was a place of wonder. There was beautiful music, delicious food, and magical sights everywhere Urashima looked. The princess showed him 4 gardens, each representing one of the seasons, all existing simultaneously. Time seemed to have no meaning in this place. Urashima stayed in the palace, enjoying its wonders and the princess's company. Eventually, though, he began to feel homesick. He missed his elderly parents and wondered how they were managing without him. He had only been gone a few days, he thought, but he should return home. The princess understood but seemed sad. She gave him a beautiful box called a tamidabeko and made him promise never to open it. If he kept it closed, she said, it would protect him and allow him to return to the palace someday. Urashima returned to the surface and swam back to shore. But when he arrived at his village, nothing looked familiar. The houses were different. The people were strangers. When he asked about his parents, an old man told him that there had indeed been a fisherman by that name who had lived in the village, but he had disappeared 300 years ago and was presumed drowned. Urashima was shocked and heartbroken. Everyone he had known was dead. His entire life was gone. In his despair and confusion, he forgot the princess's warning and opened the box she had given him. White smoke poured out of the box, and suddenly Urashima aged centuries in moments. His hair turned white and fell out. His skin became wrinkled and spotted. His back bent and his strength failed. He had become an old man, as old as the 300 years that had actually passed while he enjoyed what felt like a few days in the timeless palace beneath the sea. The parallels between this Japanese legend and the Irish story of Oisin are striking, even though these cultures had no contact with each other when these stories were developed. Both feature a young man who visits a magical realm where time doesn't work normally. Both experience what feels like a short stay but turns out to be centuries. Both return to find everyone they knew dead and their world completely changed. And both suffer the consequences of breaking a magical prohibition. These similarities suggest that the idea of time working differently in different places or dimensions is something that occurs naturally to human imagination across cultures. It addresses deep anxieties about time, the fear of aging, the fear of losing loved ones, the desire to escape time's relentless forward motion. Greek mythology, prophecy and fate. The ancient Greeks had a complex relationship with time in their mythology, particularly when it came to the future. Greek myths are full of prophecies, predictions about what will happen in the future. The interesting thing about these prophecies is that they were considered absolutely certain. The future wasn't just likely or probable. It was fixed and unavoidable. The most famous example is the prophecy concerning Oedipus. Before Oedipus was born, his parents, the king and queen of Thebes, consulted an oracle. The oracle delivered a horrifying prophecy. Their son would kill his father and marry his mother. Desperate to avoid this fate, the king and queen gave their infant son to a shepherd with orders to leave him on a mountainside to die. But the shepherd took pity on the baby and instead gave him to a couple from another city, who raised him as their own. Years later, Oedipus, now a young man, consulted an oracle himself and heard the same prophecy. He would kill his father and marry his mother. Horrified, and not knowing that his adoptive parents weren't his real parents, Oedipus fled from home, determined to never return and thus avoid the prophecy. On the road, he got into an argument with an older man and killed him in anger. That man, unknown to Oedipus, was his real father, the king of Thebes. Later, Oedipus arrived in Thebes, solved the riddle of the Sphinx, which was terrorizing the city, and as a reward was made king and married the widowed queen, his actual mother. Eventually, the truth came out. The prophecy had been fulfilled despite everyone's best efforts to avoid it. In fact, it was fulfilled precisely because of their efforts to avoid it. This raises a fascinating paradox that will become central to time travel stories thousands of years later. If you know the future, can you change it? The Greek answer was no. The future was fixed, determined by fate, which the Greeks called Moira, and nothing anyone could do would alter it. The three fates in Greek mythology, Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos, were goddesses who controlled everyone's destiny. Clotho spun the thread of life, Lachesis measured it, and Atropos cut it. Even the gods themselves couldn't interfere with what the fates had determined. The future was set, written, unavoidable. This view of time is very different from how we usually think about it. We generally believe we have free will, that our choices shape the future, creating possibilities that didn't exist before. But in Greek mythology, the future already exists in some sense, already determined, and all our choices are simply the means by which that predetermined future comes to pass. This deterministic view of time would later influence philosophical debates about free will and would create some of the most mind-bending paradoxes in time travel stories. Norse mythology, the world tree and all times. Norse mythology presents yet another fascinating vision of time, centered on Yggdrasil, the great world tree. Yggdrasil was imagined as an enormous ash tree that connected all the different realms of existence. Its branches reached up into the heavens, its trunk passed through the middle world where humans lived, and its roots extended down into the underworld. This tree wasn't just a physical connection between different places, it was also a connection between different times. At the base of Yggdrasil, by one of its great roots, was the Well of Ord. This well was tended by the Norns' three beings named Ord, representing the past, Verdandi, representing the present, and Skuld, representing the future. These three Norns would draw water from the well and pour it over the roots of Yggdrasil, preserving the great tree. The Norns were similar to the Greek fates but with an important difference. While they influenced destiny, they didn't control it absolutely. They carved runes that shaped people's fates, but there was still some room for choice and chance. Odin, the chief of the gods, was obsessed with knowledge, particularly knowledge of the future. He knew that Ragnarok, a catastrophic series of events that would destroy the world and kill most of the gods, was coming. This knowledge came to him through various means, including his visits to the Well of Ord and his consultations with seers who could see the future. In one famous story, Odin sacrificed one of his eyes to drink from the Well of Mimir, which granted wisdom and knowledge. In another, he hung himself from Yggdrasil for 9 days and 9 nights, pierced by his own spear, as a sacrifice to himself, in order to gain knowledge of the runes, mystical symbols that contained the secrets of past, present, and future. The fascinating thing about Odin's knowledge of the future is that he knew Ragnarok was coming and knew he would die in it, but he still prepared for it. He gathered the greatest warriors who died in battle to Valhalla, his great hall, so they could fight beside the gods when the final battle came. He sought knowledge constantly, trying to find a way to change or survive what he knew was inevitable. Unlike Greek mythology, where prophecy was absolutely certain and unavoidable, Norse mythology presents a more ambiguous picture. The future can be known, but perhaps not with complete certainty. There might be room to change it, or at least to face it with preparation and courage. Yggdrasil itself, as a structure connecting all realms and all times, is an interesting early conception of how time might not be as simple as past, present, and future following one after another. Instead, all times might exist simultaneously, connected by something like the world tree, accessible to those with the knowledge and power to navigate it. Hindu epics, time dilation, and cosmic cycles. In Hindu mythology, we find some of the most sophisticated ancient thinking about time, including concepts that are remarkably similar to modern scientific theories. The Mahabharata and other Hindu texts contain stories where time passes at different rates in different realms, much like the Celtic and Japanese stories we've already discussed, but often with greater complexity. One famous story involves King Kakudmi and his daughter Revti. Kakudmi was concerned about finding a suitable husband for Revti, so he decided to consult Brahma, the creator god, for advice. He traveled with Revti to Brahma's abode, Brahmaloka, a heavenly realm. When they arrived, Brahma was listening to a musical performance, so Kakudmi waited patiently until it was finished. Then he explained his dilemma and named several princes he had considered as potential husbands for Revti. Brahma laughed and explained that while they had been waiting, what felt like perhaps an hour or so, many ages had passed on earth. All the princes Kakudmi had mentioned were long dead. In fact, their great-great-grandchildren were long dead. Humanity itself had changed, becoming generally smaller and weaker than in Kakudmi's time. Brahma advised that Revti should marry Balrama, the brother of Krishna, who would be a suitable match. Kakudmi and Revti returned to Earth to find a completely different world, just as Brahma had predicted. They found Krishna and Balrama, and Revti married Balrama, but she was so much taller than people of this new age that Balrama had to use his divine strength to make her shorter so she would fit in. This story is remarkable because it doesn't just feature time dilation, time passing at different rates in different places. It explains that this happens in the heavenly realms versus Earth, creating a kind of cosmological structure to the phenomenon. Even more sophisticated is the Hindu concept of cosmic time cycles. According to Hindu cosmology, time operates on multiple scales simultaneously, from tiny moments to vast cosmic cycles. The smallest unit of time is a paramanu, an infinitesimally brief moment. These accumulate into larger units, which accumulate into days and years. But beyond human scales, there are vast cycles called yugas. There are 4 yugas, each shorter and more corrupt than the last. The Satya Yuga, Golden Age, Treta Yuga, Silver Age, Dvapar Yuga, Bronze Age, and Kali Yuga, Iron Age. We're currently in the Kali Yuga, the age of darkness and discord. Together, these 4 yugas form one Mahayuga, which lasts 4.32 million human years. 1,000 Mahayugas equal 1 day of Brahma, which is 4.32 billion years. Brahma's night is equally long. Brahma lives for 100 of his years, which equals 311.04 trillion human years. Then Brahma dies, the universe is destroyed and dissolved, and a new Brahma is born to create a new universe, beginning the cycle again. This isn't just mythology, it's an entire cosmological theory about the structure of time on scales from the microscopic to the cosmic. The idea that time might operate differently at different scales and in different realms is a sophisticated insight that wouldn't appear in Western thought until much later. These Hindu texts also contain the idea that advanced beings, gods and sages, can perceive past, present, and future simultaneously, or can travel between different points in time by accessing different realms or through meditation and yogic practices. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the quest for immortality. One of the oldest written stories in human civilization, the Epic of Gilgamesh from ancient Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, deals with time in a different but equally important way. The quest to escape time's ultimate consequence, Death. Gilgamesh was the king of Uruk, a powerful ruler who was 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. He was strong, accomplished, and proud. He had a close friend named Enkidu, who was like a brother to him. When Enkidu died, Gilgamesh was devastated. For the first time, he truly confronted the reality of death. If Enkidu could die, then so could he. All his strength and power wouldn't save him from the same fate that befell every human being. This realization tormented Gilgamesh. He became obsessed with finding a way to escape death, to achieve immortality. He heard of Utnapishtim, a man who had survived a great flood and been granted eternal life by the gods. If Utnapishtim had found the secret to immortality, perhaps Gilgamesh could too. Gilgamesh embarked on a long and dangerous journey to find Utnapishtim, who lived at the edge of the world. After many trials, he finally reached him. Utnapishtim told Gilgamesh the story of the Great Flood. The gods had decided to destroy humanity, but Utnapishtim was warned by one god and built a great boat, saving himself, his family, and representatives of all animals. After the flood, the gods granted Utnapishtim and his wife immortality as a reward. Gilgamesh demanded to know how he could achieve the same. Utnapishtim gave him a test. If Gilgamesh could stay awake for 7 days and 7 nights, he would prove himself worthy of immortality. But Gilgamesh, exhausted from his journey, fell asleep almost immediately and slept for 7 days. When he woke, Gilgamesh realized he had failed. Utnapishtim pointed out that if Gilgamesh couldn't even conquer sleep, which is like a little death, how could he possibly conquer death itself? Taking pity on Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim told him of a plant that grew at the bottom of the ocean. This plant could restore youth, offering a kind of limited immortality. Gilgamesh dove deep and retrieved the plant, planning to bring it back to Uruk. But on the journey home, while Gilgamesh was bathing in a pool, a serpent smelled the plant's fragrance, stole it, and ate it. The serpent immediately shed its old skin and became young again, which is why, the story suggests, snakes can shed their skin and seem to renew themselves. Gilgamesh returned to Uruk empty-handed, having failed in his quest for immortality. The epic ends with Gilgamesh accepting his mortality, finding meaning instead in his accomplishments and the city he built, which would outlast him. While this isn't a time travel story in the usual sense, it deals with one of the fundamental reasons humans want to travel through time. To escape time's passage, to undo death, to preserve what time takes away. The Epic of Gilgamesh raises a question that will echo through time travel fiction for millennia. Should humans accept time's limits, or should we strive to transcend them? Is the desire to conquer time noble or hubristic? Is mortality what gives life meaning, or is it a curse we should try to escape? Biblical visions, prophets, and eternity. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, time takes on distinctive characteristics, particularly in how it relates to the divine and to prophecy. The Bible presents God as existing outside of time. In the book of Revelation, God is called the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, suggesting that God encompasses all of time simultaneously. Unlike humans, who experience time as a flow from past through present to future, God sees all of time at once, like we might see a complete painting rather than watching it being created stroke by stroke. This creates an interesting theological puzzle. If God knows the future, is the future already determined? Do humans have genuine free will, or are we just acting out a script that's already written? Different theological traditions answered this differently, but the question itself influenced later thinking about time travel and determinism. The Bible also contains numerous accounts of prophets who received visions of the future. The prophet Isaiah saw visions of the Messiah who would come. The prophet Daniel had visions of future kingdoms and the end times. The book of Revelation contains John's vision of the apocalypse and the world to come. These weren't time travel stories. The prophets weren't physically traveling to the future, but they were receiving information from the future, transmitted to them by divine means. In a sense, knowledge was traveling through time even if people weren't. One of the most interesting biblical stories related to time is found in the second book of Kings, where the prophet Isaiah visits the sick king Hezekiah. God tells Isaiah that Hezekiah will die from his illness. Isaiah delivers this message, and Hezekiah prays desperately for his life to be spared. God hears Hezekiah's prayer and sends Isaiah back with a new message. Hezekiah will be healed and will live for 15 more years. To prove this, God offers Hezekiah a sign. He asks whether Hezekiah wants the shadow on the sundial to go forward 10 steps or backward 10 steps. Hezekiah says that going forward would be easy, so he wants the shadow to go backward. And according to the text, God makes the shadow on the sundial move backward 10 steps. This is a fascinating story because it suggests not just prophecy but the actual reversal of time, at least symbolically. The sundial moving backward would mean the sun's shadow moved in the opposite direction from its normal motion. Time, as measured by the sundial, went backward. Different religious commentators have interpreted this story in different ways. Some see it as a literal miracle where time itself was reversed. Others interpret it as an optical illusion or a localized phenomenon. But regardless of interpretation, it's significant that the story uses the reversal of time's normal progression as a sign of divine power. The biblical concept of eternity, a state of timelessness where God dwells, also influenced later thinking about time. If there exists a realm outside of time, might it be possible to access that realm and thereby step outside of time's normal flow? This idea would appear in various forms in later religious mysticism and, eventually, in science fiction. Common themes in mythological time. Looking across all these different mythologies, we can identify several common themes that appear again and again. First, there's the idea that time can flow at different rates in different places. Whether it's Tir Na Nog, Ryugujo, or Brahmaloka, many cultures imagined realms where time worked differently than it did in the ordinary world. What feels like days might be centuries, what feels like moments might be years. This idea is psychologically powerful because it reflects real human experience. We've all had times when time seemed to fly by, when we're having fun or deeply engaged, and times when it seemed to crawl, when we're bored or waiting for something. The mythological realms where time works differently are imaginative extrapolations of this common experience. Second, there's the idea that knowledge of the future is possible but dangerous or problematic. Greek oracles could see the future, but their prophecies often led to the very outcomes people tried to avoid. Biblical prophets saw visions of what was to come, but this knowledge often brought responsibility or suffering. Knowing the future doesn't necessarily mean you can change it. Third, there's the theme of trying to escape time's ultimate consequence: death and aging. Gilgamesh sought immortality. The Celtic and Japanese heroes found places where aging stopped. The gods existed in eternal realms beyond death. Humanity has always dreamed of escaping time's relentless destruction of everything we love. Fourth, there's often a warning embedded in these stories. Those who try to escape time or manipulate it usually pay a price. Oedipus tried to escape his prophesied fate and fulfilled it instead. Oshin and Urashima Taro visited timeless realms but suffered when they returned to normal time. Gilgamesh's quest for immortality failed. The message seems to be, time has laws and limits, and humans who try to transcend them do so at their peril. These mythological stories weren't time travel stories in the modern science fiction sense. No one was building machines or discovering scientific principles. But they were the first imaginative explorations of the idea that time's normal rules might be bent or broken, that past, present, and future might be accessible in unusual ways, and that knowledge or experience might transcend time's usual limits. These myths laid imaginative groundwork that would eventually develop into the time travel fiction we know today. They taught humanity to imagine time as something less rigid than it appears, as something that might, under extraordinary circumstances, be negotiated with, escaped from, or perhaps even